introductory lecture. It has been wonderful to have you with us as a participants. As always, we are honored to have an excellent speaker with us today. Please allow me to introduce our speaker. First is Professor Saibal Kar. Professor Saibal Kar is the Reserve Bank of India Chair Professor of Economics at the Center for Studies in Social Science, Kolkata, and a Research Fellow of the Institute of Labor Economics, Bonn, Germany. He was a Fellow of the prestigious Alexander von Humboldt Foundation during 2008 till 2009. Professor Kar has been a full professor of economics at Kolkata University and has also taught at President University, IIT Kharagpur, and IIM Indore. He has held visiting positions at the University of Amsterdam, Santa Fe Institute, Hamburg University, and the United Nations University, among many others. In 2011, he received the Canada Asia Pacific Award and Sumitomo Foundation Award for contributions in international economics. He is the managing editor of the South Asian Journal of Macroeconomics and Public Finance published by SAGI. He has been the director of the Eastern Regional Center of the Indian Council of Social Science Research. Some of Professor Kar's co-author and edited books include The Outsiders, Economics Reform and Informal Labor in Developing Economy, published by Oxford University Press in 2011, International Trade and Economic Development, published by Clarendon Oxford University Press, UK in 2014, Industry and Labor Market is in Developing and Transition Countries, published by Springer, New Delhi in 2014 at the same year, International Trade Welfare Theory of General Equilibrium, published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. And I would like to introduce our second speaker, Professor Mahalaya Chatterjee. She's a professor of urban and regional economics in Department of Economics, Kolkata University. She was also the director of Center for Urban Economic Studies, a research center specializing on urban studies in the same university till 2017. An alumnus of St. Xavier's College and Departments of Economics, Kolkata University, she has been engaged in research and teaching of economics for the last 3 decades. She coordinates a course on urban management and planning for the last 5 years. She has 2 books on urban and land economics and environmental management, respectively, and published an edit volume on a socioeconomic perspective of urban development in Howrah, the twin city of Kolkata. Apart from that, she has published numerous articles in national and international journals and edit volumes. She has also participated in seminars, conferences, and workshops in India and abroad. She has been acting as reviewer in a number of journals and in the board of editors of few well-known journals like Urban India. She also is in the advisory of board Gulf Scene Management Journal. Apart from teaching and research, she is also carrying out different administrative duties like heading department 2012 until 2014 and chairing the undergraduate board of studies and economics at Kolkata University till 2017. She is also an academic member of Mahalaya Calcutta Research Group, Kolkata, as a member of Research Advisory Committee since 2023 and attends Institute of Education and Research, Greece. She is a governing body member of South Asian Institute for Advanced Research and Development. She is a visiting professor of Impact Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. She is also an honorary fellow of BK School of Research, Shahjapur, Bangladesh. She was associated as a project specialist in Urban, an Indian woman entrepreneurship program under the 21st Century Knowledge Initiative, a collaborative research project of Kolkata University with Claflin University, South Carolina, USA. We can start our first lecture. Professor Saibal, please over to you.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Sifa. And excellent introduction and kind introduction. Let me thank Professor Ranabir Samaddar for inviting me to this program, and all of you for being here. And I'll try to be specific about the question that I was told to address here, the issue of the urban agglomeration, the networks, as well as the opportunities for the informal workers in the Indian context, as well as I can see there are many participants from South Asia in general, East Asia included. I would think that it would be relevant for the larger body of researchers who are essentially engaged with some development issues concerning the labor market participation and how they perform in general to various degrees depending on the global changes, the movements of products and services across different countries, the level of the global imbalances and the changes that keep on happening. So I'll try to give you an overview. And do I have about 30 minutes to make the presentation? And then we can have discussion for another 10 minutes? Right. All right. Okay. So allow me just a second to upload my presentation and then I go from there. Okay. So as I was kindly introduced again, so this is me. And, so this is the title of the talk is Urban Informality, Agglomeration and Developing Countries, right? So we are still on the path of development. We are not entirely, done and, dusted with in terms of the development questions and issues. It's a continuous upgradation experiment that the emerging economies and the developing countries are toying with various policies, and one of those would be typically the trade and the labor market problems that we continuously face, engage with, and try to unravel for our better understanding of the development path. So to go about it, okay. So the motivation is a screen visible, right? Just checking because this Zoom is a little different.
You see, but maybe you can make it a full screen. I think there is a.
If I make it full screen, it might not change. When I press the key, it doesn't change usually. So maybe I'll just make it a little bigger.
Okay, sure. Okay, no problem.
I think it's visible.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the motivation, what I'm trying to say here is that the informal economy, as many of you know, you are researchers in the field. You do a lot of case studies and field studies as well, as far as I understand. So you would know that the informal economy has emerged as one of the most dynamic, active, and hotly debated subject in the entire developing world. I mean, there are many issues concerning the informal sector, particularly those in the urban space, and that's what we're going to talk about. Yet, what we see is that in a continuous basis, there is certain dearth of research on the labor market conditions, the production organizations, and sometimes reorganizations of production, and the impact of external and internal policies facing the workers in the unorganized and more broadly the informal sector. Now, there have been several instances, including, my submission to some of the frontline journals in economics and development economics in particular, where we heard from the referees that informal sector is not a concern of the larger world. It's a problem of development of a few countries. Now, if you talk about a few countries, and that constitutes billions of workers taken together, 90% of all workers in India are part of the informal sector, and that would be similar in Bangladesh, Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in part of East Asia, in Thailand, and so on and so forth. This is a substantially large body of unorganized and informal workers in our labor market system, and it's simply disposed of as something that's not very general, that's not of interest to the larger, research agenda of the global researchers. So this is a concern, and this is why we have to keep hammering on the word that this is an important issue, and look how many people get affected by a little bit of change in the policies, whether you lift people up from the typical impoverishment and deprivation in the informal sector onto something little more acceptable to millions and millions of workers. So what happens is that the problem of the informal sector is typically because the unregistered, the farms are mainly unregistered. So they are not registered with the government, and therefore they often escape payment of taxes. They do not abide by various labor regulations. They do not follow the environmental strictures, or those indulging deliberate, sometimes deliberately also, in unrecorded activities. We are not going there because there are shades and there are nuances to which informal sector exposes itself, but we would typically be talking about the legal aspects of what is in somewhere in the mix of semi-legal and somewhat acceptable form of businesses and activities in the informal sector. So here, let me start off with one of the points that Paul Krugman at some point said is the crux of the matter, and this is how we kept on defining the scope of the informal sector. This is a paper by Raul Elizondo and Paul Krugman in Journal of Development Economics. I want you to read it with me as we go about it. He talks about this aspect as the trade policy and the third world metropolis. Many of the world's largest cities are now in developing countries. This paper that Krugman, who's a Nobel laureate in economics, is one of the youngest Nobel laureates in economics ever. So his work in 1996 paper in Journal of Development Economics typically talked about how the developing countries create mega cities or the giant cities. So he develops a simple theoretical model inspired by the case of Mexico City in particular, that explains the existence of such giant cities as consequence of the strong forward and backward linkages that arise when manufacturing tries to serve a small domestic market. Okay, and this is a problem of the developing world per se, that our internal markets are relatively small. We try to cater our products to the larger global client base, but our internal capacity to buy things, our purchasing ability or purchasing power is relatively very small. This case of Mexico City, Krugman and Elizondo talks about it, says that despite the fact that it's one of the largest cities in the global south, the purchasing power of the entire city is only about 5% of any US city of similar size. It's not, there's no similar size, there are smaller size, but it's only 5% of a standard developed country megapolis or metropolis. So the question is, who do these big cities serve? Krugman and Elizondo showed that the model implies that these linkages are much weaker when the economy is open to international trade. In other words, the giant third world metropolis is an unintended byproduct of import substitution policies and will tend to shrink as developing countries liberalize. Okay, and I'll show to you that at least the last claim that this paper makes, that the developing country metropolis is going to shrink, hasn't happened. It has happened absolutely in the contrary, that the third world metropolis, let's call it the developing country megacities, have only expanded in size compared to what it ever was in the 90s and in the earlier decades, right? So it's a continuous growth and agglomeration that has basically captivated how the large megacities work in conjunction with substantially huge informal sector to go with it. So what this brings us to is the basic question of how the welfare implications of trade and labor reforms typically affect the informal sector. People have worked in it. I'm not going to name names here, but I sent some materials to the coordinator here. If you wish to look it up, you can see that there are many related papers which talk about how the trade and labor market reforms have either supported and helped the informal sector, and in some cases have actually driven workers from the formal sector back into the informal sector, leading to lower wages and even worse working conditions. So it is a mix. It's a mixture of both kinds of evidence that one sees across countries. There is no one size fits all kind of reform or one size fits all kind of policy that typically addresses the problem of how informal sector can be accommodated into the urban space and create a complementarity with the existing workers in the formal sector and improve welfare in the process. So there's none, which is why it probably makes a very challenging issue to which requires continuous research and further investigation. So what informal sector does is typically absorbs a large amount of medium to low skilled workforce in the developing and transition countries. As a natural consequence, the productivity and the wage in such sectors are typically low compared to any comparable activity in the formal sector. The prevalence of the large informal labor market should then, in some cases, I mean, if you have come across this famous paper by Shapiro and Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, before before his avatar in the World Bank, he was a strong spokesperson for how the labor market should function in the industrial setup. And he talked about the efficiency wage argument, according to which if you raise wages of the workers, it creates unemployment in the market forcefully, and that disciplines worker from not shirking in the job market, right? So workers may have some tendency to shirk in the job market. So this policy by Shapiro and Stiglitz, discussed in a very famous economics journal, it talks about a policy which just simply raises the wages of everybody and therefore creates lack of demand for workers in the labor market, and therefore disciplines workers so that they do not shirk. So it serves a kind of a capitalist purpose that you create unintended unemployment in the system. You could have made wages flexible, adjust and accommodate everybody who's applying for a job. Instead, you raise it above the market clearing level and create unemployment. Okay, so informal sector is another way of thinking that the government and people of with vested interest in the industrial setup and the capitalist system is typically trying to create a large army of informal workers just sitting on the fringes waiting for a job, but that keeps the wages low, that keeps the working conditions less than what is demanded in a typical developed world. Now let me make it clear in the very outset that I am actually in favor of some of the reforms that we talk about here, right? So it's not like I'm against this industrial or the capitalist system, which is in practice as far as the productivity and the welfare goes. I would like to argue as a case here that despite all of these practices, the Indian industrial system needs to have a protectionary device in place so that the interest of the worker is not completely compromised with. Okay, so I would take a market-driven approach supported by certain kinds of compensatory policies that can make the equilibrium much better compared to a zero compensation scheme for the workers, as many developing countries practice. So to point further on this, I would like to say that the erstwhile, this was a natural outcome of what has been happening over time, that the protected import substituting firms, India had a long history of protecting its firms from external competition. It led to opening up of the domestic market to external competition, right? There were several examples. I mean, in the industrial sector, there are products, there are companies which are protected from 50 years back in India, in South Asia in general. And one fine morning, well, not one fine morning, there was a trajectory that India was going to liberalize over a period of time. And by, say, 1991, 92, it took about 5 years to materialize. But regardless, the ball was set rolling in about the early 1990s that India would lift the protection on the domestic companies, which would allow them not only to become competitive with the rest of the world, but there would also be a reasonable possibility that many firms which were not technically updated, not technically equipped to handle external competition will not survive. Okay, so the consequence was much of the workforce which was part of this protected industrial formal sector started losing jobs. Okay, and that led to the movement of workers into somewhat, in the shadowy world of the unorganized and informal sector. Okay. Now, when we go back to the development stories from 1950 onwards, Arthur Lewis, he was the father of this entire discussion of how the rural to urban movement has actually been the way industrialization happened. I'm not going to talk about that because this is a very well-read literature, and I'm pretty sure all of you know this. Subsequent to, but I just wanted to remind you that the precursor of all I'm saying typically goes back to the works of Arthur Lewis and followed by Harris and Todaro in 1970, American Economic Review, which showed that the informal, they do not talk about the informal sector. They do not talk about the unorganized sector. All they say is that people do migrate from the rural areas to urban areas, okay, and they wait in a vacuum for a job to open up in the industrial sector. Okay? Point is, in the developing countries, this wait cannot be indefinite. There's no way somebody can have resources to wait for a formal job to open up sometimes in the future and just invest in something right now. Okay, so they have to go and join something because the fallback options are very few. There's no social protection in most of the developing world, and therefore there's no way but to accept something which could be anything between an odd job or to something in the formal sector, but contractual and informal in nature. That's typically is the urban informal sector. This is how the urban informal sector opened up. And I'll talk about cases where both Partha Chatterjee, and I'm pretty sure you know these names, and Kalyan Sanyal, who was an economist, unfortunately died at a very young age, relatively young age, but did something phenomenal about the labor who's in between this rural and urban systems. Basically nowhere. It's like a no man's land. If you think about informal sector as the unorganized sector as a no man's land, it's between the formal industrial sector and the rural agricultural sector. Unless it develops into something as a linkage between the two, there would be no reason to assume that it survives on its own. So there were linkages forward as well as backward. There were movements forward as well as backward. People did go back to their rural areas with lack of jobs in some urban areas. Once they migrated, they became a permanent migrant from one metropolis to another. Okay, so smaller cities around larger cities grew up. There were basically agglomeration effects, which is exactly where I started with in terms of the Elizondo-Krugman structure. That Mexico City was initially a smaller one, then it started growing in the fringes, and then it started growing in the fringes. It's like a circle after circle of settlements and work, which are part of the informal arrangements that kept the city growing. Okay, so the point which Krugman and Elizondo at some level said that the large third world metropolis is going to shrink if the economies liberalize. It doesn't. It didn't. If you look at the third world metropolis, it only grew because you still have to accommodate so many people who are ousted from the formal sector. In today's world, I speak with many of my colleagues from Eastern Asia, from China and other places, everybody's in the same situation. I mean, they continuously observe that the older bastions of formal employment has given away their advantage and scope to informal employment, to engagements in the unorganized sector. It's just contractual workers everywhere, and they are part of this huge urban body. Okay, so it hasn't shrunk. The informal sector, typically in its own kind of characteristic way, bypass formal regulations applicable to the labor market, as I already told you. So there are possibilities that there are violations, but how far the state accepts those violations is a question that we have to understand. And that's also the reason why the metropolis and the informal sector coexist. So in many cases, the apparent regulation-related disadvantages turns into price advantage owing to an imperfect and easily corruptible monitoring system in poor countries. Okay, so many of you would know and agree with me that some sections of the unorganized sector, informal sector, is in violation of what you would accept as straightforward legal statute for holding an organization or creating an organization. Many of them flout these simple norms, the basic norms, just because they do not have copyrights, they do not have land rights, they do not have a space to actually buy and set up their shops, wholesale, retail, manufacturing, whatever their activity is all about. Many of the informal sector production actually happens in the home state. You know that, right? So I mean, people live and work in the same place. So it's basically a strange mix of low-level technology, access to resources, capital, some capital, but largely labor, some land. There are support from the municipal systems in terms of electricity, in terms of water. And so there is this huge, body of unclear legal status, this kind of, ambivalence between the formal and the informal that these people exist. And the urban centers all across the southern world have accepted and have lived with similar situations. You go from Asia, South America, Africa, all of these places, right? And I'll show you some graphs to support these things. Okay, so let me just jump to this without wasting some time. Just to follow up on what I said, that does international trade actually take away the sting of the informal arrangements and make the metropolis smaller? Look at this graph. I mean, I'll just take half a minute to explain this. The blue bars and the line, of course, and the curve, of course, measures the tariff rate. Forget about MFN. MFN is a particular term. It's called most favored nation tariff, which is the most acceptable tariff rate in all over the world. But just think of it as a tariff rate. The import customs duty put on the import of intermediate of any good, final and intermediate. And the vertical bars of the purple colored bars, these are the sizes of the informal jobs, the number of informal jobs as percentage of total employment. This is an older data. It's sometimes very hard to keep on accumulating and basically adding to the new data, because sometimes ILO does publish it, sometimes they do not. Individual country level data comes in various types, various forms, in various definitions. So there's a degree of non-comparability if you look at individual country level information. ILO does a much better job by pulling them together, giving it a uniformity in terms of definition and what it basically covers. So we used ILO data, and this shows that places where the tariff rates were the smallest perhaps, had much longer vertical bars, right? So the informal activities were much bigger in countries which were more open to international trade. So the import substitution as well as some degree to protect the domestic production from complete obliteration by international trade and competition from rest of the world. The informal sector stood as a cushion. It is basically the barrier between complete annihilation of domestic production of low varieties and the infiltration of international trade and various products associated with it. So informal sector hasn't gone away. It has only grown in size. Okay. So then the subsequent question, natural question, is how to deal with it, right? And what we can do in order to make a much better cohabitation of the formal and the informal sector. Because you see, this is not a world where you can just kill off the informal workers and say, look, we got rid of informality. No problem with informality any further. That's, it's a joke, but obviously it's not an option either. So here, let me just skip the definitions here for the sake of time. I wouldn't have much time. So what we therefore argue is that apart from the reforms or changes in international trade, which I showed is somewhat responsible for creating and maintaining a large informal sector in many urban economies of the developing world. Similarly, reforms in the labor market may also create two kinds of possibilities. Okay, on the one hand, if you do allow easy hiring and firing policies and provision of unemployment insurance, they are expected to lower informal employment and raise wages. That's very simple, because formal firms often do not hire. The organized firms are scared that if I hire somebody, I would not be able to get rid of that person. Okay, if the person is non-productive, simply shirks in my firm, what would I do? Getting rid of a worker from a typical formal organized firm is very difficult in the developing world. I can speak for India. I mean, unless somebody is caught red-handed stealing or doing something, some kind of a nuisance at the organizational level, you cannot throw that person away easily. There have been changes in the labor market policies. In recent times, there have been new labor codes which has allowed this kind of policies. I'm not exactly in favor of what the government have done in terms of recreating the labor codes and labor market policies, but this is not the forum to talk about that. But all I'm trying to tell you is that if you allow the formal institutions to be more flexible in terms of hiring workers and firing them without having to go to the government for asking their permission, then informal employment goes down, formal employment jumps up. Okay. Furthermore, if the informal sector faces higher taxes and stricter regulations, informal sector may grow in size. This is just the opposite. I mean, you can ease the labor market for the formal firms, but then slap them with huge amount of taxes and stricter regulations on other fronts. They would try to stop production, cut back on their activities, and push things into the informal sector. This is the backward-forward linkage I talked about a couple of minutes earlier. Okay, so informal sector in the urban space often survives because they have been supported by the formal sector. Part of the formal sector production typically flows into the informal sector, keeps them running. Okay, formal sector buys the product back from the informal sector, puts them, it gives them a formal stamp and then sells it in the market. That's a marketing part of it. But major segment of the production, if you call it production fragmentation, that's a proper word to use in this case. That fragmented part of the work is handled largely by the informal sector because they produce it at a cheaper price. Their wage cost is lower. They don't have to pay environmental fees. They can flout many other regulations also, which the formal sector cannot do. Okay, so informal sector is not going to go away so easily. The formal sector is actually the benefactor behind the persistence of informal economies. Political strategy, a little bit. In fact, the government, weak governance that includes incapability of containing corrupt behavior on the part of the monitors may be closely linked to political strategy leading to extraction of political rent from the evaders. By varying magnitude, this applies to both large evaders and to a large number of own account enterprises and vendors who pay small bribes. Okay, so my point here is that do you want to monitor that if the formal sector is actually pushing its production to the relatively illegal, not entirely illegal, but semi-legal informal sector, and we want to do something about it. Okay, how do you do it? You need monitors, you need government personnel who just go and check if the production is according to the book or not. Okay, now these people are very quite easily corruptible, and they are typically the rent seekers from the informal sector for a small fee, sometimes small bribes from the vendors, from the local producers, from the retailers. They would simply turn their eyes to the other side. They would not look. This is also part of the larger political strategy of a government, which cannot create enough industrial jobs. Okay, so this is in a way passive acceptance that I would allow you to live informally, produce informally, as long as you do not create, disruption in the system. You do not create a mass political, uproar. Yeah, so it's a compromise also on the part of the polity to keep the informal sector going. Let me jump slides. Okay, so this is a graph, if you can kindly see this, and it typically covers everything from Argentina to West Bank and Gaza, right? You see all the developing countries with moderate to high shares of informal activities across the world. In South America, again, many of you might know, the informal sector has actually gone down in size somewhat. Okay, there are many reasons for that. Again, we don't have time to discuss the entire part of it, but there have been some changes in the informal policies, policies towards informal sector, unorganized sector in Latin America, which is why the size of the informal sector has gone down. Okay, and the largest share, still lies with India. You see this blue arrow here? That's where India is. So it's just not the numbers, but not just the numbers in employment in hundreds and thousands, right? But it's also the share of the total employment, which is close to 92%, that India holds in the informal sector, right? And over time, as you know, the large and medium cities have increased in India by almost a phenomenal rise of about 50% compared to just the last decade. Right, so these larger and the medium-sized cities harbors the informal sector in the way of producing many industrial and semi-industrial commodities. If you want to look at this in further detail, I have this paper in IZA World of Labor. It's a free publication, freely available from the IZA Institute of Labor Economics in Bonn. If you just type the name IZA, my name, my last name, perhaps, you might be able to download this paper quite easily. And there are much more details compared to what I just spoke about. All right. So since some countries, given this cross-country distribution, it is natural to inquire if the level of informalization in a country increases or decreases as the economic reforms are initiated. Now, as I told you, there is no single answer to this. There is no one-size-fits-all kind of economic reform. So we tried many things. We looked at Brazil, we looked at Bolivia, we looked at India, we looked at Thailand and East Asia, parts of China, and so on and so forth. In many cases, we find that if capital is allowed to flow relatively freely into the informal sector, the wages grow up there, productivity rises, and that channels the informal workers into accumulation of human capital so that they jump the restrictions and the barriers of development for the next generation, right? So if it's an intergenerational mobility of the informal workers, then you do see that a simple trick as flow of capital and funds into the informal sector can do a lot of benefit to the workers in terms of growing and becoming, self-sufficient and not dependent on the informal sector in the next round. So if it's like an overlapping generation model, in say about 15 years, 20 years, you would see a new generation coming up who's not dependent on informal sector any longer, which is a good thing, which is basically what development is striving for. If you can really push an economy, nudge an economy towards development in about 20 years' time, that's what anybody's looking for. Right. I'll just skip some of these things. I'll tell you the story a little bit. You see, this is also like the epitome of our urban informal sector in a country like India. If any of you have seen this televised series called Outsourced, okay, it's an outsourcing venture of an American company into India, right? So let me read it. Outsourced begins with an American sent to India to train the low-paid employees of a new call center for his company, right? And you can really see the similarity with many of the East European and South Asian countries, working similarly in Philippines, in Malaysia, in Singapore, and Singapore is developed, by the way. So this American, what do they produce? This American novelty products is what it sells. They sell quiche to redneck schmucks. His Indian assistant of this American company owner asks him, "Excuse me, what is redneck? What is a quiche? What is a schmuck? And what are these products really?" These are typically American eagle sculptures, Wisconsin cheesehead hats, branding irons for hamburgers. So although wages are low in India, Mr. Purohit, the assistant to the manager, makes about 500,000 rupees yearly as a new manager. That comes to about $11,000, which is enough for him to marry his beloved. He has been waiting to get married for a time. And, you might want to watch this. It was a fun televised series. Point is, one evening, there's huge rain in one of these, north side small city arrangement that this call center has put up their their organization in. So post-rain, the business floors is completely flooded. The business is a night-long affair. The team seeks help of a local electrician for a nominal pay who would move all the computers to the open terrace, hook up a connection from an adjoining high-tension line, and then run business as usual. Okay? So it's an American company which brings in outsourced services to India, and then look where it's being produced after the rain. You see the picture? So it's in an open terrace. The electric line is hooked to an outside, high tension line. All the computers are there. It works. 5:57 in the morning. Yeah. What can be more informal in a city than this, right? All right. Two final minutes. Sifi, can I speak for two or three more minutes?
Absolutely. Yes, sure. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Right. So I'll just skip the industrial clusters because I put it up. If I had time, I would talk about it, but that's not important. This is another trivia, another picture. Do you know this person? I wouldn't expect you to. Suddenly, he's not a celebrity anymore. I mean, he was at some point. All right. This is from pertains to a well-known poem, "The Road Not Taken," and this person is Robert Frost. Okay. "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost, and I want to talk about the classification of states in India in terms of labor laws, which actually defined how far we can really see the degree of informality creeping in according to certain regulations. Robert Frost wrote, let me read through this. Robert Frost wrote, "The road not taken as a joke for a friend, his poet friend Edward Thomas. When they went walking together, Thomas was chronically indecisive about which road they ought to take, and in retrospect, often lamented that they should, in fact, have taken the other one. I mean, this like a road bifurcates. He takes the right one and then says, "No, no, we should have taken the left one. Why did we go right?" Soon after writing this poem in 1915, Robert Frost wrote to Thomas that he had read the poem to an audience of college students, and this is in Cambridge, and that it had been taken pretty seriously. Despite doing my best to make it obviously by my manner what I was doing, I was fooling. Okay, mea culpa. However, Frost liked to quip, "I'm never more serious than when I'm joking." So if you remember the poem, it's always about saying that I should have taken that road, I did not. So I lament that if I had taken that road, it would have taken me to some kind of, I would have met somebody. Okay, I wanted to meet. I would have gone to a place where I wanted to go, but alas, I did not take that road. So it's like a perpetual agony that I took the wrong direction. Okay, how does it relate to informality? Well, give me a second. Besley and Burgess, they are from London School. They wrote a paper which says that according to the Indian industrial relations as given in our constitution, there's a labor is a concurrent subject. Concurrent means the state and the federal office can jointly work on this particular issue, and they can amend the law according to suit their local needs. This implies that so therefore, more formally, the central and the state governments have joint jurisdiction over labor regulations and legislations. So the key piece of central legislation is the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. We inherited many of these things as part of our colonial legacy, but then we kind of, restructured, reinvented, redesigned to suit the typical Indianness of the labor market and other the factories, etc. So the act was designed to offer workers in the organized sector some protection against exploitation by employers. Okay. Besley and Burgess showed, let me jump directly to these things. They took a sample of pro-worker reform from West Bengal in 1980. Okay. The pro-worker reform was that the limit of 45 days for workers receiving 50% of their wages upon being laid off if they work for more than a year is removed. Okay. So what happened is that this type of reforms and the local amendments were in addition to what the central government had actually planned. Some states have taken a particular direction, other states have gone the other way, which is why I related to Robert Frost's poem that there are two ways that states could ideally take. I'm not saying one has done the right thing, the other has done the wrong thing. It's not about right and wrong. It's just about historically what directions the states have taken and what the outcomes were. Okay, I'm not making a judgment here. I'm not making a value statement at all. Okay, I'm just stating certain facts here. So 6 states, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Tamil Nadu were identified as pro-employer, which means that any decision they take on behalf of the company would help the employer more than it helps the workers, right? For example, removing the unconditional leaves and benefits, and say maternity leaves are shortened, right? I mean, if people are sick, the sick leaves are unpaid for. There will be disruptions in the work if you are not performing to the desired extent and so on. So then there are many such regulations. I cannot probably detail that out as of now, but these were the pro-employer regulations. 4 other states, namely Gujarat, Maharashtra, Odisha, and West Bengal, they picked up the pro-worker legislations, right? So the regulations they picked up, like the one you have in red on the top, the 45 days of workers receiving 50% of their wages upon being laid off is removed, which means that the workers would get 50% of their wages being laid off despite any other conditions, unconditionally almost. That's a pro-worker regulation. Yeah, state also passed other regulations in the process. So Indian states were therefore divided according to either pro-employer or pro-worker. Okay, what happened? There were six non-committal states. They did not come to a conclusion at the time. Now they all have. But this is historical facts. Between 1985 and 1995, Assam, Bihar, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, they did not say whether they want to go pro-employer or pro-worker. They did not say anything. Regardless, things started changing rapidly after that. What happened? The states with pro-employer regime experienced faster growth of formal industrial units. Quite rightly so, because if it's a formal pro-employer regime, it means that the employers are given free hands, like free firing and hiring, right? So informal sector doesn't have to exist. I mean, they can be part of the formal sector and yet, be treated as contractual, informal workers with no fringes, no support, no benefits. It's still part of the formal worker, right? Formal sector. So they had an expansion of the formal sector workers. What else? The pro-labor states, the pro-labor regulations, the states with pro-labor regulations had stagnated in formal industrial units. And they had more informal enterprises coming up. This paper, however, could not explain low informalization or high industrialization in Gujarat and Maharashtra. Interesting. Gujarat and Maharashtra were not pro-employer to begin with. Okay, so they were much more pro-worker. Okay, so if it's pro-worker, you would expect high informalization. That did not happen. It's probably because more capital flew into the informal sector and actually made them agglomerate, make bigger, and become part of the formal sector as a subsidiary or something, right? So even within this urban space, you would expect that the informalization would take a different turn, would take a different format. All right, so I'll just finish with this one. Okay, and this is what, in terms of the registered manufacturing units, in the, not all of them are in the urban space, of course, but around the bigger cities in all of the states that I've mentioned here. This is what you see. This is the starting point, is a very left axis at point 0, and then it grows. Andhra Pradesh grows. Assam, because they were non-committal, went up and down.
If you can wind up, because
yes,
there is hardly any time for questions. So if
yes,
you could
I'll finish
just
in 1 minute.
Wind up.
Yeah. So Bihar, Gujarat, Haryana, Jammu Kashmir, Karnataka, and Kerala. West Bengal's case is particularly interesting. You say it. A lot of people say that West Bengal is deindustrialized now. Look at where West Bengal started. Very high in terms of industrialization. It remained more or less constant. It did not decelerate appreciably. It fell, no doubt, but not like it just, vanished from the map of industrial activities in India. It remained there, but the deceleration had begun. It had started falling, which is now epitomized as one of the least industrialized states in India. So informalization is very high. Let me finish this. I'm done. So just my concluding remarks. In ways to keep the informal sector still valid and working, there may be need for production fragmentation from a technological point of view, so we can have outsourcing from the formal to informal sector with capital and technology flowing as well. We had a paper in World Development some years back, which we showed that the formal sectors typically outsource production to informal sector, and with capital moving from the formal to informal sector as well, which raises the quality of activities in the informal sector. They occupy part of the cityscape, the urban infrastructure and facilities that we share. It's better that they kept within a particular range, but without effective policies, without dedicated policies, one cannot have a potential way to estimate what should be the outcome in the in say another 5 or 10 years. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Saibal. So, unfortunately, we don't have much time. Maybe just one question. Anyone from the participants?
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I had a question, meaning I know a lot of, I work in a private university, so I know a lot of our students work in the informal economy while they're students. So I was just thinking that, and some of them earn quite a lot of money and they also pay their tuition fee with that as well. And they become enticed because they're earning a lot of money and they don't really think of pursuing a job from the mainstream economy. So do you think that this can be sustained into a way of life in an urban city, or do you think that in the future that they will not be able to sustain themselves? Because as you know that when you're part of this informal economy, you get money daily or maybe weekly, but you don't get certain benefits like gratuity or contributory provident fund and those things. So as soon as they stop, they kind of have empty hand. Whereas if you work in an organization, after 20 years or 30 years, you live with a package through which you can, sustain the rest of your life. Thank you.
Yes, it's a very important question, and we don't really know the answer to this because, like you exactly mentioned, that as long as these people work, there's a flow of money. But as soon as they retire, it's basically gone. There's nothing to fall back on. There's no social protection and things like that. So perhaps some of these countries are now experimenting with this idea of social protection in some form. That there's a monthly grant of certain amount of resources to the informal sector. There was one committee, at least for India. It was Arjun Sengupta committee set up in 2007, which provides certain kinds of social security to the informal sector workers as long as they qualify for that. So it's not like that, they would not be able to sustain that. There are many occupations in the South Asia, as we typically know, for example, a chauffeur for a car. Once the person retires, there's nothing else he's going to do. So there's no flow of money. So the government has to sustain that in some way. So that's coming to the popular debate in the urban areas for the political purpose associated with that in particular, that it attracts vote bank, right? So there is a transfer from the government to support that kind of old age benefits and pension. There might be some way to keep working.
Yeah, but if the government becomes aware that somebody is working in the informal economy, then the government will also impose tax as well. And some people might not want the government's intervention because in that case they would have to pay taxes as well. So it's like,
doesn't government hardly? I don't know of any government in the developing world which actually puts tax on the informal sector, or at least direct taxes. There are definitely indirect taxes they're exposed to, but whether you talk from South America or to East Asia, I don't think informal sector workers are taxable income. They, same as agricultural income in India. Agricultural income is quite high. In different parts of the country. So agriculture is also without taxes. So they can pay a little bit of tax, but I don't know. This is typically the political economy setup, which would either allow or completely disallow the use of taxes for this particular segment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Saibal. So may I kindly circulate your email? Maybe there's some still participant who wants to ask more about your study or research, if that's okay.
And absolutely, I'd be very happy to.
Thank you so much. It was a very wonderful lecture. And it's very complex. I know that's why it's not enough actually to talk within just 1 hour. But unfortunately, due to the time constraint, we can't make it extend until another minute. But thank you so much for joining us today. And
thank you for inviting me to this program. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we can start our second session. Please welcome Professor Mahalaya Chatterjee. She is here. We already introduced you before, so we are excited and we can't wait for your lecture. So over to you, Professor Mahalaya Chatterjee.
So thank you, Paula. And thank you to IDRC Chair, formally AIT, for inviting me for delivering a lecture in this course. As I'm introduced, I am not going to reintroduce myself. Just the fact that I am a colleague of Paula in Calcutta University, and we share a very long-term relationship. So I am really pleased to join in this course organized by IDRC, AIT, and MCRG. So as decided, I wanted to talk on tertiarization and informality. Now, tertiarization and informality are the key words of world urbanization today. So the global urbanization process, modern urbanization process, what we know as urbanization today. I am not talking about historical urbanization, historical urban centers of the world, etc., etc. I'm not going into that. So the global urbanization process that we know as modern urbanization, that started with the industrial revolution in the Western world. It started in, as you all know, the England. Then it spread to the countries of Western Europe, and then in the New World of America during the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. Now, one of the main bases of urbanization in the post or during the Industrial Revolution or after the Industrial Revolution was the development of big factories or industries in the urban areas. Before that, urban areas were mainly, apart from other that seats of power and others, it was basically they were places where the elites, gentries, the royal people, they sat, and there were some artisan products, etc., mainly luxury products for the consumption of the rich and royal. But the main basis of production was agricultural production, apart from textile weaving and others, which were concentrated in the rural areas. But what the Industrial Revolution changed is the growth of secondary sector or the growth of industrial clusters in big cities. That was due to many reasons. One of them is the agglomeration economics. Spread by the industrial sector. That is, one is called urbanization economics. That is where heterogeneous type of activities concentrate in the urban area because of the phase of supply demand, and also the localization economics. That is what they derive from other types of activities. Now, so industries started booming in the urban areas. That is, for the first time, in big factories, etc., came in the urban areas, and then following these industries, the tertiary sector also developed. That is, as you understand, that big industries, large factories led to concentration of capital, that led to monopoly capital and others. And monopoly capital needed other type of services like banking, financial services, etc., etc. So, in this way, the tertiarization started to be there along with the industrial clusters in the post-industrial revolution cities. So, and also there were with colonialism, spread of colonialism, there was also spread of so-called worldwide trade. So port cities also developed. Most of the cities we see today in the world as the big cities in, say, New York, London, Tokyo, etc., all of them started as port cities. And then also most of the colonial powers in the world, they had their corresponding port cities developed. Corresponding port cities developed in their colonies. So, in the in the so-called colonies of the European powers also had their share of big ports like Kolkata, like Java and others. Now, so the but what we can see that the way the industrialization thing happened in the Western world, that is in Europe, especially Western part of Europe, in the North America and others, urbanization did not happen in the same way in the so-called colonies. There, urbanization was mainly based on administrative services. That is, the administrative tentacles, the colonial powers they developed, the port cities, the gateways to the world, and then the other, then mainly the extractive economies, because in every part of the world, the colonial powers, they had their colonies as their supplier of raw materials. Maybe it is minerals, maybe it is processed or semi-processed agricultural products like jute, cotton, etc. Jute, cotton, spices, etc. So the initiations of the modern type of urbanization in the colonies, today's global south or others, most of the part of this global south were part of the colonies was quite different. The urbanization was not based on the type of industrialization that happened in the Western countries. So that what happened after that, after the colonial powers, most of them left their countries, left their colonies. The colonies became independent or some other types of dependency or so and so. But what happened there, that the way industrialization happened in the colonial the colonial power of the countries, that did not happen in the so-called other countries, the so-called colonies. There, the industrialization, the factories were mostly the so-called mostly processing factories like jute factories in Kolkata, the cotton factories in other parts of India like Ahmedabad and Mumbai, then the spice companies and the sugar factories in Indonesia, and so and so. So they just the appendages of the industrial structure in the so-called ruling countries. So when it happened, when the independence happened and the countries wanted to frame their own economic policies and others. Now, again, because of this industry-led urbanization in the Western countries, migration was quite common. The presentation of the shrinkage of agricultural land and use of better technology in the agricultural land, they freed labor from the agricultural sector or the primary sector, and they came to the cities for work and other for search of work, and they got job in the industries. Not that they got job in, all of them got job in big factories, but they got job in different type of factories, maybe small, maybe big. If one looks at the stories of contention in England, they will find there were match girls, seamstresses, and others. So when we talk of the industrialization efforts of the so-called colonies, today's global south, it was thought that migration would happen. There is no way that migration can be restricted. Yes, some countries, especially of the socialist bloc, USSR, China, they tried to control migration in their ways. But in other countries, migration was very common. So in one of the very notable article of 1954 by Arthur Lewis, here he talked about migration or industrialization with unlimited supply of labor. They thought that the agricultural sector was suffering from the surplus labor syndrome, as there is no other option. People are working in the agricultural sector, so their marginal product of their labor is zero. They are not effectively producing anything. So if they are transferred to the so-called urban industrial sector, there will be no loss in the agricultural sector. Rather than they would find their worth or their value in the agricultural, in the industrial sector. So it was a case of industrialization with unlimited supply of labor. That was for a long time, that was taken as the so-called Bible of so-called migration-driven industrialization and so on. But from 1954 to, if you just see 2 decades or so, by 1970s, it was clear that the industrialization will not happen in the global south as it happened West European or American countries. So the industrialization effort of the global south, that did not happen in the way as it happened in the global north or the so-called advanced capitalist countries, even in the so-called socialist bloc in the 50s and 60s. There are 2 or 3 reasons behind that. One is, of course, the dearth of capital. The so-called these countries did not have enough capital to set up industries. Secondly, they also did not have the technology for modern industrialization. So they had to depend on very age-old technologies and others in their industrialization effort. Most of the countries, they tried to have foreign collaboration, foreign aid, etc. But that did not yield very, very prospective results or anything else. So by 1972, we could find that the idea of industrialization with unlimited supply of labor from the agricultural countryside is not possible in the so-called global south. There are people, because of agricultural distress, because of other types of natural calamities like flood or drought or anything else, or maybe because of political reasons, have to come to urban areas, and there they do not have enough scope to get absorbed in the formal urban sector, that is the industrialized sector. At that time, it was so the binary was like this, that agriculture and industry depicted rural and urban. So that if somebody comes from the agricultural sector, there is very little chance that he will be absorbed in the industrial sector. And that is so in 1972, when the UNO did the Kenya mission, they formed this term informal sector. Which is really different from the formal sector, but there are also components of informal sector, means that is a sector which depends on informal labor, and that gives rise to sort of informal economy in these countries. But Kenya mission in 1972, they coined the term informal sector. They found out that this informal sector is very common in the global south. At that time, it was not called global south. At that time, it was called the developing countries, underdeveloped countries, or developing countries, or sometimes the third world countries. So informal sector became a very common thing in Latin American, African, and Asian countries, the South and Southeast Asian countries. So people come, people do not get any formal, they are not absorbed by the so-called formal industrial sector or formal, so-called, so to say, the tertiary sector in the cities. So what do? They build up their own economy, own sort of economy, and they survive on that. They survive on that. Now, but the Kenya mission, they thought informal sector as a transitory phase. They thought that after some time, it is just a transitory thing. After some time or after some years or so and so, this formal sector will expand as expected, and all these people will get absorbed in the formal sector. In the formal sector. But unfortunately, starting from 1972, in more than 50 years, this did not happen. This did not happen. Of course, some of the countries, they tried on their own. The newly industrializing countries like South Korea, Indonesia, Singapore, etc., they tried on their own. They tried to absorb the informal sector by training them, by skilling them in the formal ways. But most of the countries failed in all that aspect. So we find a dual type of economy in most of the global south, where the formal sector is defined, formal sector is legal, formal sector is somehow having the social securities and other type of benefits from their labor, from their workers and others, whereas the informal sector has none. And we see this informality in different forms. It's not only economic front, but also other fronts. Let me just elaborate a bit or two. That is, now again, there is another explanation of the proliferance of informal sector everywhere. That is, sometimes it is looked into that it is a response to the over-regulation in the formal sector. Over-regulation in the formal sector, over-regulation in other types, in labor absorption, over-regulation in terms of environmental control and others. Given that the informal sector is another way of producing a so-called lower level of economy at much cheaper cost. That informal is not to be equated on illegal. Illegal rather than it is an offshoot of uneven capitalist development and so and so. That is what is produced in the formal sector, giving the labor it's all the formal dues, including social securities, buying raw materials and others, paying all sort of taxes and others, leads to the price of the commodity at certain level. But if you do that in an informal sector, you can produce it in a much cheaper way, in a much cheaper value and others. So there is a parallel production system in the so-called economies of the global south. Now, this informality is being studied in other sectors of in other ways, not only production, but also in other ways. Now, let me just tell something about that why tertiarization has taken place. That is mainly because of the change in the production process all over the world. The capitalist industrial production has become more and more capital intensive, more and more dependent on mechanization and others. So that again, that goes beyond the so-called global south countries, most of them suffering from, as I have said, capital efficiency and others. They have to think of other ways. Now, in the Western world, we have seen that this mechanization of production and other things leading to a type of industry or factory production that is quite different what happened in the uh, in the 18th and 19th century. If you go to the birthplace of industrial revolution in any English city, you will not find any of the single factory visible. Yes, factories are surely there, but they are not the so-called smoke belching chimneys, etc. That type of industrial production is totally gone. But the dependent tertiary sector, that is the service sector of banking, financial, real estate, etc., has been proliferated in these countries, and a major part of their national income, their GNDP, comes from the tertiary sector. It's about more than 80% of their GDP comes from tertiary sector. Only 20%, 15% from industry, and 5% from agriculture. Agriculture. Now, this is the model, that is the tertiary, has become the model of development in this part of the world also. Now, India has taken the lead. Now India's GDP, the share of the tertiary sector in India's GDP is about 65% by the latest estimate. That is industrialized sector or the secondary sector is only 15 to 16%, and rest is the agricultural sector. Now, as the tertiary sector is mainly concentrated in the urban areas, and these are basically very small enterprises dominating the global south. This they are fighting something between the survival versus expansion type of thing. If you look at Indian data and also data from African countries, you will see that most of the manufacturing and services sector, they are basically what is called in India the own account workers. That is the single owner. Sometimes there's family members helping there, or one or two hired workers helping them. And they're very small enterprise, but they're widespread. They basically act as informal appendages to formal sectors. They supply. One of the World Bank studies by Izaz Ghani and others found that in most of the India's trade sector, the both export and import, that is the basic things before they are being assembled or something, the global value chain, the basic things are produced in these very, very small units. And also in the tertiary sector, that is the service sector itself, we have seen different types of economic formats arising, which were not there even 20 or 30 years ago. That is the platform workers, the gig workers, that's where you can demand a service depending on whether you have a smartphone or not. There are apps and others. You can ask for delivery of goods. Delivery of formal goods, or delivery of vegetables to groceries, to anything else, delivery of food apps, etc. That is the platform economy. That you are just ordering through an app. The person who is delivering. He is not the employee of the so-called company where you have ordered. They call them as a partner, and they get a part as a their payment is for the commission. The profit the particular company is earning is not shared with these gig workers or the platform workers. They are just partners. They get a part of the payment, and also sometimes they get something from the customer itself. If you order food in a food app, they will ask that whether you want to tip the delivery man. If you ask for a cab, they will ask whether you want to pay something extra to the driver and so on. So this has become the nature of the economy. Nature of the economy, that is we are depending on the tertiary sector. Tertiary sector, the formal industrial sector, the industrial sector has become something with very small units and others. Rather than expansion, their main motto is survival. Now, this informality, it is sometimes hidden from our apparent understanding. If you, I can give an example of what is happening in India. That is, if you look at the security guards and others in institutions, in residential complexes and others, they wear nice uniforms, etc., etc., and you think that they are part of the formal sector, but not. They are just supplied by some other agency to work, and they are just contractual workers without any social security benefits and others. So they are legal. It's not that they are illegal, but they remain as informal appendages of the formal sector. We fail to identify them as informality. Now, coming to different forms of informality. Now, there can be economic informality in different ways. Why it is important in case of urban development, urban planning, etc. You see, when these people come to the urban areas, the first thing they need a shelter on their heads. But again, there is a failure of the so-called formal sector. They do not get proper places to live and others. So what do they do? They go for informal housing where they do not have proper legal tenant rights, etc. Same with land tenure. You will see people migrating from rural areas and etc. They are going to the most vulnerable places in the urban areas. That is vulnerable in the sense that ecologically vulnerable places, maybe the canal side, maybe in the side of the railway lines and etc. They build their squatters, etc. They do not have any proper housing with sanitation and other facilities like water, drainage, etc. And also, they do not have any land tenure type of thing. So when formal planning things or formal expansion of the urban amenities, facilities are required, these people are generally ousted out. They are displaced because then there is a conflict with property rights, with human rights. From human rights point of view, it is deplorable. But if you want the urban amenities to be expanded, urban planning facilities to be introduced in all parts of the urban areas, you cannot extend it to all these settlers because they do not have any formal life, right? So sometimes it happens that as the formal state apparatus, etc., ignores them or erases them, there is a sort of collective opposition or sort of passive or active resistance happening everywhere. Now there is, apart from this economic informality, there are some other types of informality which I will not elaborate, but I will just touch upon. One is, of course, I have already mentioned, that is the legal informality. That is the outside the formal legal reach. Most of the workers in the informal sector, they do not have any formal contracts or rights. For land, they do not have any formal title or property rights. Sometimes the legal structure of the country doesn't even recognize them. And that happens in case of sort of encroachment, unauthorized things, incomplete legal transaction, etc. If you look at the street vendors, in most of the cities of the world, sometimes it may happen that the street or the space on the street, that also has an illegal market. Illegal market. The street is the property, street or roadside is the property of the urban local body. But you will see a sort of transaction going on there, some maybe with political patronage or others. Somebody is selling that land or somebody is regularly collecting money for that piece of land for where a street vendor wants to sit. And this happens because of incomplete legislation and others. If we recognize the street vendors, we have to formulate a complete law so that they have their right that where they would sit and they are not coerced by either by the police or the political people or so on. So if to avoid these harassments, again, again a series of informalities happen like bribes, etc., and so and so. Then there is other type of this legal and political informality. There is other type of informality like technical, social, or cultural, and so on. So now technical informality happens. That is when these organizations or others do not have the purchasing power for the formal technology. Then they go for some type of, in India, we use a term called juggar. Juggar, and so that type of machines and others are being built to carry on production. And sometimes these are not compatible to the work safety regulations, not to talk of other types of security of things. If you look at the construction sector, most of the time we see that the laborers work without any sort of security and any sort of security type of thing. When they go up for construction of a house, they do not have proper belts, proper helmets, etc. That is the way they work. They are not compatible to any formal technical standard, but they are used because of their cheapness. These labor is cheap to get compared to formal labor from any formal institution. So in the global south, most major part of the economy that survives on this this type of tertiarization of each and every activity, and the state tries to just ignore them, not to look at them, not to talk of their rights, Now, sometimes a few years back, a terrible accident happened in Kolkata when 2 or 3 laborers, they just died when they went to clean the underground sewers. Now, it is illegal to clear the underground sewers by men, but the contractors do that because that is cheaper than the machines. But as this is totally informal, totally illegal, they don't even have the name of these people in their roles. They are basically migrant laborers from other impoverished part of the country. So when these deaths happen, they couldn't even give the details of the laborers who have died. So for some days there is some sort of hula hoos and others, and then everybody forgets about that, and these things continue. That is the mechanical cleaners. They're costly and others, unfortunately, than the cheap laborers. So this has an implication on the urban scenario of the global south. Now, urban planning is something which tries to connect between this formality and informality, because urban planning tries to provide amenities and facilities to each and every person living in the urban area. Living in the urban area, whether poor or rich, whether taxpayer or not, because these things like clean water, proper drainage system, proper sewerage facilities, then solid waste management, these are right of every citizen. So urban planning, urban management, etc., they try to cover all these people. But where they fail, as I've already said, that is because of this informality. That to connect between the formality and informality sometimes become very difficult. If you know something about slums in India, you will find that there are, in our official records, there are 3 types of slums. One is recognized, one is notified, and another is just identified. So these recognized and notified slums are in the books of the government, maybe the union government or the state government, and that comes directly to the urban local body, that is the municipal corporation or the municipality. But the identified slums are just identified. They do not have any legal entities. So when urban planning tries to extend their facilities and others to the residents of this identified slums, which does not have any legal authority, what would happen? That they are not being able to do so with every good intention of them, because as I have said, that is there the formal or informal sector, formal or informal housing, etc. That division becomes very, very, very important. So now that what has happened in the urban areas in the global south, one finds that tertiarization, India has started the way, but most of the countries in the global south are following it. That is, industrialization is no longer the driving force for urbanization. It is the tertiary sector, and the tertiary sector is not at all a transitional thing as predicted by or as forecasted by the Kenya mission of UNO in way back in 1970. It is here to stay. It is here to stay, and it has spread its tentacles, starting from the economic being, that is the economic production of service system, to other forms, that is the legal informality, political informality, technical informality, and everything. So, if you want to understand the urbanization of the global south, you have to understand the informality that has grown over the years, starting from people not getting job in the formal sectors to people living in informal squatters, people engaging in informal activities of different forms, and also informal. There is a parallel informal way of living, which is far away from the so-called formal sector. It's a parallel dual economy going on in the global urban areas of the global south. So let me stop here.
So what we do now is we have the question and answer session. I do hope you can hear me. So
Yes.
I request and invite the participants to ask their questions either by raising their hands and unmuting the mics, or by leaving the questions in the chat box. And I will take the privilege of being someone who has control of the mic right now to ask you a question first, Mahalaya. Thank you so much. And it's very interesting how your lecture talked to the previous lecture, which was by Professor Saibal, who talked about how, given predictions earlier in the century about how third world metropolis is bound to disappear with the abolition, or not the abolition, with the withering away of certain kinds of formal employment possibilities, the informalization of labor has actually led to the increase in size and population of third world metropolises. And you approached it also the question, you also approached the question of informality in third world metropolises from the aspect of, towards the end, what you said was the governments and local bodies that are responsible for the welfare of their people can get away with doing very little because of the informalization of holding practices, of occupations, as well as even dwelling spaces where informal settlements are. So, what I feel from your presentation is that, on one hand, the informalization of labor contributes to the growth of the urban, but is there also a way in which the urban amenities, urban facilities are constricted because of informalization? That would be my question.
Mamata, can you repeat the last part? It was not fully audible.
So I was asking whether there is a way in which the informalization of labor, but also informalization of habitation practices constrict the rights of the person who lives in the city. Not all are treated equally in the city.
Yes, of course, that the COVID was an eye-opener. You see, in COVID, where at the time of COVID, when this return migration started, at least in India, that is maybe the first time the so-called educated people, middle class people, they came to know that how this migrants labor, who in fact run the economy in the urban areas, they just leave. They just leave. That how they do not have any formal tenure or contract of tenancy or anything. That one fine morning they lose their job, or their where they are working that got closed down because of COVID, and then their so-called I must not use the term that is a landlord or the house owner, but that is also an organized type of thing. But sometimes that is linked with the place where they work, because their job sector that entails them to get into some sort of housing, or some sort of shelter over their head. I dare to call it a house. It's a shelter over their head with some sort of or the bathing facility and latrines, etc. Etc. So as soon as their job was, they cannot continue at the job for the lockdown. They even not continue in their living place, because these two are tied together. Informal working and along with informal living. So these people are not in the so-called role of the urban local bodies, because they are not payers of tax or anything else. So there lies the problem. That is the so-called factory owners or owners of other types of tertiary services, etc. They employ migrant labor because of their cheapness, etc. That they will work with any pay and others. They arrange with some homeowners. This is very common in if you go to Gurgaon and other places. They arrange for some type of living facility. And both of them go away by just one stroke. One lockdown, they lose their work, they lose their living place. So that is what is happening all over the, at least in most of the urban areas in India, where the migrant labor is very common. Migrant labor is the source of cheap labor in the urban areas, urban informal sector.
Thank you. That does answer my question. Participants, if you have a question, kindly raise your hand and or leave it in the chat box. Already, would you like to add something or ask something?
Yes, Mahaladi. Actually, I wanted to ask this in the previous session also. Mahaladi, can you clarify this conundrum? The previous speaker was talking about why, yes, because we all know that there is no taxation in the informal sector. But, he was also talking about no taxation in the agricultural sector largely. But one saw this huge farmers' protests and farmers' suicide. So one understands that taxation is just one part of the expenses, but what are the other problems that agricultural sector faces, whereby the workers, the landless laborers, as well as even landholders today, are progressively getting pauperized, and there's, so much of farmers' suicide and so much of farmers' protests happening in India.
Paula, if I want to start about talking about the agricultural sector, it will take another hour. But you see that the informal sector is being plagued by different types of so-called informal taxation. As we talk about, I don't want to use the Bengali term, quote unquote, tola. That is for a street vendor, for anybody else, he has to pay a so-called tola to a political others. So there is sort of informal taxation. You see that with this Arjun Sengupta committee, Arjun Sengupta committee on the unorganized sector and others, that submitted their report in 2006, and the informal and the Urban Street Vendors Act was passed in 2014. Today is 2026. Till now, as I know of Kolkata, I can say that none of the vendors, it started very, maybe 1 month back, that the vendors in the Esplanade area started to get their identity cards and their vending right cards. So it took 12 years. 12 years to just get their cards, and as I know from this activists of the Hawkers Federation or others, that is, it just started. It just started, and it's just a drop in the whole thing of ocean. So what happened? We remember when we were students and we went to that part of Kolkata because most of the movie halls were located there, and at the same time, most of the hawkers were also placed there. There was a term called Halla Party. Halla Party means that the police is coming. Police is coming. Now, once the word goes that the police is coming, these hawkers, they just disappeared. I don't know how first they could move. They could just put their things and others, and they just disappeared somewhere. And then after 1 hour or so, when the police party has been gone, they again come back. So they have to work with their existence. They have to work for their living. They have to carry on this, but they have to play seek and hide with the police and others. We all thought that the Urban Street Vendors Act will end all these things. That is okay. They have also, we have to recognize that they have to all earn their living. So it was said that they could occupy 2/3 of the footpath, 1/3 should be left to the pedestrian. They should have formal cards, not only giving their names and other details, but also the place where they are vending, the exact place to be demarcated by GIS or something. And there should be a vendors committee in each urban local body who would recognize the genuine vendors, and one has to register with that vendors committee. Now, after much hulabu in Kolkata, as I know, this vendors committee is just being constructed. Again, there is lots of debate about that, whether everybody got right representation or not, and so. But this long run process that is 12 years after the passing of an act. So it's not that it's only the legal or loss of the absence of any legal framework, absence of acts and others, but actually the thing is that is maybe it lies in the political ethos or anything that whether we think whether these people are necessary for our economy, then we have to provide them with their necessities. I don't know whether that answers your question, but the thing is that we are very slow to recognize that they are part and parcel of our economy. And
just as an explanation, because we have our participants from Mexico to Philippines. So the terminology that Mahalaya used, tola, it's a very typical India Bengali terminology that probably participants from Bangladesh understood, but it's a kind of extortion. So it's an extortionist money. Shariar has a question. Yes, Shariar, go ahead.
Okay. Well, most scholars, when they discuss informal economy, tend to focus on the blue-collar labor market. I want to know something about the white-collar labor market. In your opinion, with the rise of technology and artificial intelligence, do you think the white-collar employment sector will be impacted? That is, in the future, do you think there will be more outsourced, contractual, or freelance jobs rather than tenured jobs?
as I told you, the nature of job has almost changed. What we thought as white collared work at least 50 years ago is no more there. If you look at the tech employees and others, they are also most of them are now contractual workers. That you get a job, you get it for lifetime. It's not there. It's in most of the cases it's no more there. I'm not saying that everywhere it's just hire and fire, but most of the cases that there are performance-based indicators and others which help you. It's a sort of contract renewal type of thing. That if you have to fulfill something, only then your contract will be renewed. It's not that you get a job and you carry you can have it for your lifetime.
Yes, but I want to know whether technology will play a big part in this, especially AI, artificial intelligence.
Yes, there is, of course, AI is looming before us. That AI will change the nature of job market totally. Some of the jobs maybe they may be extinct sometime. That AI will do their job. AI will do their job. We don't need person for that. Person of that fear is always there. But of course, I think that there should be some alternatives will definitely emerge, because we cannot think of a world where that some people will enjoy everything and some people will never get anything, and the percentage is something like that. 10% of the people enjoying everything and 90% of the people not getting anything. That cannot continue. As I have talked about, that in smaller spheres or in bigger spheres, there is sort of passive or active resistance to all these tendencies. In all these tendencies, you will find that that few days back, 15 or 20 days back, there was a strike of the railway workers in Germany, one of the most buoyant economies of the world. And transport sector in Germany is very much well developed. Even then, even their workers have to go for strike for regular working hours and etc. So as the nature of job is changing, nature of job contract type of thing is changing, so also the resistance and maybe passive or maybe active is also changing all over the world. No one can say the last word. It's an evolving thing. It's an evolving thing. What has happened in 18th and 19th century suddenly got changed in 20th century. In the new millennium, we are seeing different type of equation between the work and the worker and the work provider. So this will go on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we also have a question in the chat box, and I think Emilio has a question from Mexico. Does clientelism have a role in double or informal taxation and or extortion in India? That is the question.
It's difficult to answer this question, but if you think of the underworld controlling a part of the informal sector, the sort of networks in the slums and others, there is clientelism. Definitely there is different sort of extortionism. As I was said, that as there is a lack of formal tenure, formal tenancy rights, for legal contract for housing, legal contract for land ownership, that advantage is being taken up by this clientelism and the so-called extortionist political powers. Unfortunately, that is there. That is being depicted in movies, in literature and others, but it clearly comes to discussion of formal economics.
Thank you, Mahalaya, and thank you, participants, for asking the question. Emilio has a follow-up comment, which is to say that is interesting because it would mean that formalization has a very important component of gaining the political allegiance of populations captured by clientelar networks. I think that you're exactly correct.
If you ask me, yes, formalization is the need of the day, but who will do it? Who will do it and how it can be done? How it can be done? As I have said, that the formalization of the street vendors in Indian cities, that is the process. The act was being set in 2014. 2014, and but still now, most of the Indian cities have not been able to complete that. If that was being done before the pandemic, then the hawkers would have been saved during the pandemic. The street vendors would have been saved. But most of them were not entitled to other types of doles that was being given during the pandemic, like the food and other types of health that are being given, because they did not have any formal identity card or that they are street vendors. And they are street vendors. Even the police did not allow them to sit at the time of unlocking because they did not have anything. They did not have anything like that. So it's sooner the better. Sooner the better. That is, let me start with this street vendors sector. Then it may spread to other informal sectors.
See, in the context of migration also, we keep saying that the best thing is safe, orderly, and regular migration.
Yes.
So, safe, orderly. Who creates the order? So who
Yes.
will create the formality? And does formality denote that the people, the sectors that we are talking about will also get equal justice? That is also questions that we have to ponder. So, there's a lot that the states can do. But, there is something beyond the state which is called market. And, that is often in contradiction with each other. And that's the fun of a city, because you have all these interplays in the city, where you understand that a level of formality can give support to the worker, but what is the cost and who will bell the cat as it is?
Exactly. Who will bell the cat and how will he bell the cat?
So much, Professor Chatterjee, and it was a very interesting and insightful lecture. and too unfortunate that we cannot make it or extend it again. So, Professor Chatterjee, if I may ask you permission, can I disseminate your email to the participants?
Yes, sure.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Professor Chatterjee, for joining with us. Thank you so much.
So everyone, today is your last day for your assignments. Please make sure we get all your assignments before 12 o'clock today. Because as you know, next week is our final week. We have the closing session, and I am hoping very hard that we can make it a public session so that all of us who are interested can join in. So, so that you can also bring a friend along for the discussions if you want to. So let's hope that this has been a fun course for you where you also learned a lot. If there's anything more that you want us to do, you can always, put it in your responses. So thank you very much. We enjoyed from our side thoroughly being with you from January until March. We hope you will remain with CRG and CGFDAIT, and we hope to see you again and again in our programs, in our dissemination efforts and discussions.